I did read the script.
And then great, thank you.
you.
Good afternoon, everyone. What an honor to be together tonight for the Business as a Force for Good Annual Ethics Symposium. It's great to see you guys. We're wonderfully honored to have Sam Polk and Naomi Atlantic from Everytable. I just want to say a brief word of introduction and then introduce Dean Dale Smith, who will give us our welcoming remarks, and then I'll speak a little bit more to introduce Sam. We are honored to be co-sponsoring this event with a number of valuable colleagues. My name is Jeff Thies. I'm a clinical associate professor of management and director of the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability. And this event is co-sponsored by the Department of Management of the College of Business Administration, with a special shout out to Dr. Kathy McGrath and Dr. Ellen Ensher, the Pam Rector Center for Service and Action, the Accounting Society, the International Business Society, LMU Match, and the Marketing Society. Thank you so much for your sponsorship and your support. And now I'd like to introduce our Dean, Dale Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. I love when we talk about who's co-sponsoring an event, because when you're talking about food justice and food security, and you see the diversity of the organizations that are behind this, you really recognize what it means to be talking about business ethics, sustainability, and business as a force for good. On behalf of the College of Business Administration, it's my absolute honor to welcome everyone to be here today. The annual symposium is always very meaningful to all of us in the CBA, particularly because of our mission. And if you missed it walking into the building, it's sort of hard to miss all of those Post-it notes. But what's wonderful about our mission wall is we talk about the real importance of our mission, which is to advance knowledge and build business leaders with moral courage and creative confidence to be a force for good in the global community. And today's topic of the symposium goes to the heart of that. As a school that believes deeply in the principles for responsible management education, we believe in these sustainable development goals, and food justice and food security is such an important part of that, making this really special. But it's not just us, and it's not just Prime. We're part of a bigger community of the International Association of Jesuit Business Schools, and the IAJBS, that's the short term for the long name. The IAJBS has a wonderful inspirational paradigm where it really calls out the hungers that this next generation has for a better world. In the words from the Laudato Si from Pope Francis, this notion of how do we care for our common home? And that's not just about saving the planet from a perspective of climate change. It's all of the social justice issues that make that planet inhabitable for our global community. So we're there in that as well. And I also come back from a meeting that I was in Kansas City, where I got to share some really exciting news that I'll share with everybody else, is that as part of 4 global organizations, Oikos International, the Global Movement Initiative, our IAJBS, our International Association of Jesuit Business Schools, and the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. All 4 of those groups are talking about how do we educate the next generation of leaders to make a difference in this global community. And together, those 4 organizations, with the endorsements and support of more than 800 business schools around the globe, submitted a MacArthur 100 grant. 1,700 organizations submitted grants. We made the next round. We're now in a group of 500 and in a period of participatory review. But why that's important and why I'm sharing that with you is it's very much to the points that Sam's going to probably talk about shortly. And that's the notion of what does it take to be the tipping point? At what point can we work together as a global community and start to get the things that we care about and that we'll talk about in this room today to make a major impact in our community? Anyway, I look forward to hearing Sam speak and all of the different interactions that we'll have as a community, because I really do believe that this generation is the tipping point, and those of us who work to support this generation are the ones that can be the catalyst for change that really does allow us to advance our mission and make the world a better place and to care for our common home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Smith. For our afternoon, first we're going to start with Sam speaking with us. And after his presentation and conversation with us, maybe a couple of moments for question and answer. And then, as part of working with Sam and speaking with Sam, we asked, what might we do for you? And Sam asked that our students think about how to create viral marketing campaigns to advance brand awareness for scratch cooked meals. So we brought that to 3 classes of seniors, and we had over 16 projects of student presentations, from which we've selected 4, and those 4 will present to you this afternoon. And Sam will ask some questions after each of those presentations, and then after the 4 are presented, then share some overall feedback and observations. So it's going to be a great afternoon of dialogue, of insight, and really of passion for business for good, as Dean Smith spoke of. Now, let me introduce Sam Polk. Sam is the co-founder and CEO of Everytable, an omni-channel fresh prepared food business, making healthy food affordable for all, and founder and board member of Feast, a national nonprofit that advances wellness in underserved communities. In a prior life, Sam was a senior distressed trader at King Street Capital. He is the author of the memoir For the Love of Money, published by Scribner's in 2016, and the viral front page New York Times op-ed of the same title. His writing has been published in the Los Angeles Times, the Orange County Register, the Huffington Post, and CNBC.com. Sam serves on the leadership board of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, the advisory board of Conscious Capitalism, Los Angeles, and the advisory board of the Resnick Center for Food, Law, and Policy at UCLA. He is a graduate of Columbia University and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst CFA designation. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Sam Polk.
Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? So I'm happy to be here with you today. I am, as was just mentioned, the CEO of Everytable, which is a California-based business that's profitably selling healthy food in underserved communities. We have now 38 locations around Los Angeles, and I do think, actually around Southern California, and I do think that we're the only company in the country that's profitably selling healthy food in underserved markets at scale. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Everytable and how this came to be. But as I was thinking about sort of what to say here, I was also thinking about, when I was in your seats quite some time ago. And I figured that I'd share a little bit about my story as well. I think one of the things that I've sort of come to believe about the world is that we're all on a very, very personal journey. And that journey is really, to see if we can live up to our potential, or to see if we can sort of answer the question, did you have a good life? Are you living a good life in a way that you can answer yes to? And so, I've had a lot of, success and a lot of failures on that path. And I figure that, sharing stories is probably the best way to help you in the positions that you were in. And also I want to say thank you for putting so much work and effort into the projects that you did. I really appreciate that. So I grew up here. I grew up in Glendale and went to high school in La Cañada. And I basically grew up in a family where it was a pretty stressful, chaotic childhood, a lot of issues around money. We were sort of like lower middle class, but we were always sort of on the edge and running out of money. And then I went to Columbia, and in my first year at Columbia, my entire sort of like life fell apart, basically, which was that my parents got divorced. There was a big affair that sort of got uncovered, and my whole family basically sort of exploded for a little while. And so in that first year of college, I went through, basically in the span of a year, I think I was kicked off the wrestling team, kicked out of Columbia for a semester, went and got a job in San Francisco, got fired from that job for getting in a fight, had quite a bit of drugs and quite a bit of alcohol, and then got back to Columbia when I was probably like 21, and I was sort of like at the end of my rope at that point, and so all I wanted to do was find sort of stability. And so when I was figuring out what I was going to do after college, the one thing that I had in my mind was, let me find a job that I can guarantee that I'll get paid $100,000, and that I have a skill set that can sort of make that the case forever. And so at Columbia, Wall Street recruits on Columbia, and so I got a job in the analyst program at Bank of America, and I went onto the trading floor there. And it was really like the first time that I had seen sort of what Wall Street was like and what sort of true wealth looked like, which was, I would walk into a trading floor and guys had, just huge wads of cash and, shirts like I'd never seen before. And you could just tell like people had a level of money that I had never seen. And I loved it. Like I loved Wall Street because I loved how intense it was. I loved the culture of it. It was sort of like this big sort of sports team, and almost like I wasn't a part of a fraternity, but it was sort of like that. It was like this culture and tight-knit, and you were competing with each other, but you were also really close friends with people, and it was really intense. And that first year, I made, I forgot what it was. It was like $50,000 in salary, but then a $40,000 bonus and a $120,000 bonus. And I spent the next 10 years basically trying to climb up the Wall Street ladder as fast as I possibly could. And I didn't really sort of, I guess I would say I didn't really become conscious of what I was sort of trying to get to until I was about 30, when at the time I was in the head of distressed trading at one of the largest hedge funds in the world. And it was this weird thing where I guess I had always just been climbing and trying to beat the people next to me and see how much I could get and where I could get to. And for the first time, I got to this job that it wasn't the top of Wall Street, but it was sort of like you could see the top of Wall Street. Like I was, I was reporting directly to these two billionaire guys who had founded this hedge fund. And it was like, for the first time, I could see what a life like this looked like. And for the first time, I started to feel like, I don't know, like maybe something was missing. And around that time, for whatever reason, I started to read a lot of sort of books about life, I guess is how I would put it. So I started reading Thoreau, I started reading Gandhi's autobiography, and then I picked up this 3-part series by Taylor Branch about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. And in this very, very thick books, he just goes into such detail about every single important happening in the 60s around civil rights. And I was fascinated by all of it. During this time, it was sort of 08 and 09, and the market was crashing, Lehman Brothers was going down, all of Wall Street was sort of falling apart. And so at work, everybody was freaking out, although we were one of the hedge funds that was short the market at the time, so we were actually making quite a bit of money during that time. But I would go home at night and I would read about the civil rights movement. I would read about the Freedom Riders. And if you guys don't know that story, these are basically activists who would board buses in the North, and both white and black, and head down on basically transcontinental buses into the South to protest segregation, which was illegal at the time, but still very much in practice. And they were practicing principles of nonviolent resistance, and they would ride these buses down, and people in the towns they were going into would hear that they were coming, and so they would pull up to bus stops in Montgomery, Alabama, or Mobile, and be met with a crowd of people carrying bats and bricks and chains, and they would open the door to these buses and just file out to basically take a beating without fighting back, without resistance, to stand up for what they believed in. And there was something so sort of like jaw-dropping about that courage and that conviction that, A, was inspiring, but B, in a weird way, I think now it's sort of like, I think it started to hold up a mirror to me on some level. Not that anything that I've done since then can even approach the intensity of that moment, but to see that there was people that were choosing to live a life and to put their lives at risk for something that they believed in, not for themselves, but for what they thought was right and what they thought was good for the world. And so there was something about that that just sort of stuck with me, and it stuck with me enough that it sort of itch became a problem, and I started to realize that there was something like on Wall Street where I felt like I liked it, but I guess there was something missing. Like I felt lonely and I felt sort of exhausted, but not exhausted like I was working too hard, because a job at a hedge fund is actually not sort of investment banking hours, but more just exhausted about the sort of like constant chasing and trying to get this bonus and trying to get this. And so what ended up being a pretty consequential decision at the end of that year, I ended up resigning from that job and really not knowing what I was going to do, but just knowing that, I guess on some level, like we all have this one life to live and we all have this choice. And for the first time, I felt like instead of just chasing this thing that I had been chasing for a long time, I needed to sort of think about it and figure it out. And so I ended up leaving, coming back to Los Angeles, and then, really sort of, I spent a little while writing and not knowing what I was going to do. And then my wife and I, we sat down one weekend and watched a bunch of Netflix food documentaries. And one was called A Place at the Table, and it was about the intersection of food and poverty. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen, I'd ever heard anything about neighborhoods that they called food deserts, and the idea of food justice. And to me, it seemed like this idea, like, a pretty simple idea, I guess, that healthy food should be available and accessible to everyone and should be a human right instead of a luxury product. And, the next morning, I sort of woke up and my wife and I started talking, and we just had an idea to see if we could figure out how to do something about that, to maybe buy, some groceries for somebody in a food desert in Los Angeles. And so, we started making phone calls to people and started talking to people. And soon this idea for a nonprofit that would help parents in underserved neighborhoods who were trying to get themselves and their families healthy, came to be. And we started, reaching out to organizations. And before I knew it, I was running a group of 8 parents in South Los Angeles who were dealing with sickness in their family and wanted to get them their kids and their parents and their families healthy. And so I was running these groups, and keep in mind that I had no idea how to run a group or start an organization or how to do any of that. But I just remember being with these folks and coming up with a curriculum and talking every day and about how to sort of deal with this world. And I loved that work, and I loved the relationships that we were building, and I loved the work that we were doing. And I did that for about 3 years. And about 3 years in, there's this idea. If you guys ever read these screenwriting books, there's this idea that basically says that all stories sort of follow a standard path. And there's one terrible moment after you've sort of like gone into this new world and you're trying to figure it out. And there's a moment called Dark Night of the Soul, where you're way in a worse place than you had been when you started the journey. And I sort of woke up one day and I realized that I was there on some level. And what I realized was that, first of all, nonprofits were really hard to grow and really hard to scale. And I was running this nonprofit, and I thought that it was going to be about helping people in underserved communities, but now what I ended up doing was having to raise money from wealthy people all the time, which was fine, but you could just see that my life was going to become this donor meeting and that donor meeting and this big, event and this big gala and this big gala, but it was more about the fundraising than it was about the work and really doing anything. And so it felt like it wasn't going to scale. And at the same time, my wife and I were starting to think about kids and have kids. And I started to realize that, Wall Street for me had all been about, how much money can I make and how much can I get for myself? And now I had gone to the complete opposite side of the world, and I was doing all this work to help, and I was really proud of what we were doing, but there was also something missing. I had that same sort of loneliness that I had when I was on Wall Street, because it felt like something was missing. And, it took me a couple of years to realize what it was, but I think the truth of it is, for me, and this is just personal, is that I think that I have sort of 2 sides to me. One is this sort of like deep ambition to make money and take care of my family and build something really big. And then I also have this equal part that feels like, but I also want to do something good in the world, and I want to help people, and I want to make the world a more just and equitable place. And the problem with Wall Street was that there was no sort of doing good, and the problem with nonprofits was that there was no way to build anything and build wealth and build success and build stability. And I think that, one of the things about, where you guys are in the world is like, it is, I don't know how you're thinking about it, but it is like a tough position to be in because, when I was 19, I was pretty, or I don't know how old you guys are, 20, 22, but I was pretty idealistic and I wanted to help a lot of people. But I also I didn't think at the time, or I didn't understand how hard it is to live in Los Angeles, how much things cost and how much rent is and how hard it is to buy a house. And, when you're in your 20s, you don't have to deal with kids and family, but pretty soon it happens and then you have these big responsibilities. And so I started to think well, what if I could figure out a business that would do both of those things at the same time? And we had this idea for a business that would basically dramatically reduce the cost of food by changing the way that effectively a restaurant is structured. So if you think about any restaurant, think about any big restaurant chain like Sweetgreen, for example, great business, but each Sweetgreen is basically a salad production factory where they're taking in, fresh produce and protein and chicken, and they're doing all the cooking themselves, and that's great. The problem is that if you've got 30 different Sweetgreens, that means you have 30 different food production facilities that each have their own kitchen, which is very expensive to build, their own team, which is very expensive to hire, their own sets of equipment, which are very expensive, and not enough volume to really get the efficiency that you can get in a big factory. And so Everytable, the simple idea with Everytable was, can we create a single kitchen that we run with incredible efficiency so that you can significantly drive down the cost of food and bring food into neighborhoods that don't have access. And so we raised some money to do that. We hired our first chef, and we opened the first store in 2016 in South Los Angeles. And let me tell you, opening the first Everytable was a terrible moment. I mean, just absolutely terrible, because it was this first of all, the sales were not good, the food was not good, but it was also this thing about we had worked for a year to come up with this idea, and then this terrible moment of vulnerability sort of opening the doors of the store. But, after that first week, we started to stabilize, we started to grow, we started to build, and frankly, we've been working on the same thing for 10 years now. And I think what we've learned sort of along the way is a lot. We've learned that it's way harder than we thought, that starting a business is really hard, figuring out how to effectively run a manufacturing facility is really hard, figuring out how to open stores is really hard. But at the same time, and this is what I love about business, is that it just compounds over time. And so we learned how to make a good salad and make a good dressing and cook a good chicken and figure out the labor model in the stores and the labor model in the kitchen and figure out how to raise money. And then as we started to get better and better, we figured out how to do different things. Like we started this franchise program where we raised a bunch of money from foundations so that we could have our store managers who basically, what we had in our store managers was these really talented people that cared about the business, and for a lot of reasons, they were relegated to $17.25 an hour, and then if they were successful, to getting a $60,000 a year job as a district manager. And for us, it was we want to create a big business, but we want to do it in a way where everybody can share in the upside, basically. And so we ended up going and raising a bunch of money from foundations and what are called CDFIs so that we can take these talented store managers and lend them the money to start their own Everytable businesses. And so now increasingly, Everytables are owned by folks from the communities that we're trying to serve who now own these stores. If you go to Everytable Inglewood and Everytable Long Beach, and soon Everytable Compton, and Everytable Watts, and Everytable Monterey Park. All of those will be owned by entrepreneurs that had a ton of talent and a ton of hard work, but didn't have sort of access to capital in the way that they needed it for a first-time entrepreneur. And so, you know, I'm sort of getting to the end of my talk, but I will say that, you know, the good thing about, I think, Everytable and for where I am in the world is that the thing that I'm most grateful for, I guess, is what I would say, is that I found a way to, I found a career where I could both spend a ton of time trying to build this thing into a multi-billion-dollar business, and at the same time, you know, have the, basically like quench that other part of my sort of personality that says I want to figure out something that helps people. And I do think that that's like, for me at the end of the day, like, and not that anybody here asked me for advice, but this idea of like, if you can figure out a way to do something that you love and that you deeply care about, that touches you as a person, and at the same time build a business and build something that can grow and compound over time so that you can, you know, you guys are in your 20s and you're about to work so hard, you know, in those 20 years, you know, in your 20s to get ahead in the world. And the thing that I think is the most valuable on that is if you can do that in something that as you work hard, that work compounds and builds and grows over time. You know, to me, I think that's the, at least that's the answer that worked for me. So thank you guys so much for your time. Thanks for your interest in Everytable. Thanks for the work that you did on the project, and I'm happy to take any questions. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, hi. I was just kind of curious, like, what was your thought process at the time when you were thinking about leaving your Wall Street job? You know, obviously there's a high salary that comes with it. There's a lot of risk in taking that step. What was like the pros and cons you were having with like your wife or like the decision-making process?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, she was very helpful in that because I think that her and I are sort of the same on some level, which is like, we do think that it's not about how much money you make. It's about like whether you can figure out your place in the world and whether you can figure out something that fits. And when I thought about it, I could just, you know, and I see this every day, which is like, first of all, the money on Wall Street is great. It is 100% great. And the people that stayed that I worked with, they all have a lot of money. But I would say 90% of them didn't make as much money as they wanted, and feel like, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but this is just the conversations that I have, like they feel like something is missing. And so I think the thing that I was sort of starting to grapple with is like, you make this decision when you're 20 because, you know, Credit Suisse comes and holds a recruiting thing at your school. And then you go there and all of a sudden you're 60 and that's what you've done with your whole life. And so I think for me, it was like, okay, well, I think that at the end of the day, none of this really matters. Like, we're all going to die. It's all going to be gone. Nobody cares. And so, you know, the question is not, to me, is like, how can you accumulate money and live a safe life and hold on to the seat that you've got? But I read this book once, the guy said, like, it was called Your Life is a Story. And it's like, live your life as if you're going to tell somebody that story years later. And the story of like, well, I got nervous about when I was 28, but I decided to hold on to that seat so I could clip a coupon for 30 years. I don't think is a great story, personally. Micah, real loud. If you could stand up real loud and say maybe you could repeat the question. You got it.
So you talk about expansion. Where do you see the future of Everytable? Because I know right now it's kind of local to Southern California. Do you see that expanding to California?
Yeah, I think it's going to be bigger than Subway for us, and I think that's like 30,000 locations. Like, I think that one of the things that I've realized is like, you know, the food business So some of the biggest businesses in the world are retail businesses, and they're very hard and they take a lot of time to build. But the trick is that once you get effectively a box, a model that works, and if you figure out enough things that you can keep replicating that model, it's very challenging to do that. It's like, it looks like Starbucks is like so easy to do and Chipotle is so easy to do, but these are like 1 in a million concepts that figured out how to break through. But once you do that, and it compounds, and the learnings and the brand and the supply chain and the logistics, all, it becomes this snowball that just can't be stopped on some level. And so, like, you know, it's taken us 10 years almost to get to 38 stores, but that's a lot. That's actually faster than a lot of those guys that I mentioned, because it's basically like, one of the things I got from Wall Street was this deep belief in the value of compound interest, and like, you know, it goes like this. And so I think that we've got a model that's not, I don't say it's perfected yet, but it's so economically powerful that I think it's going to be everywhere.
To follow up on Mike's question, can you talk a little bit about your thinking regarding supplier relationships, and how does that build into your overall perspective on food justice?
Yeah, the question is about our supplier relationships. And the good news, this is sort of easier to say because we're in California, which is the greatest producer of agriculture basically in the entire world. But we source from local farms, and because we don't have to go, because we're only getting the food from the farms to our single kitchen, and then we handle it from there, we can just go directly to farms. And so that is a really, it's not that important in terms of the cost structure, but it's definitely important in the freshness and the quality of the ingredients to go direct to farms. Thanks.
My question is, for someone who always strives to be the best, you want to do better than you did the day before, how do you deal with a roadblock when it comes your way or any adversity?
Thanks. Thank you, Ibrahim. The question is, how do you deal with adversity? So I've learned, you know, I don't want to sort of like lionize running a business and being an entrepreneur. You know, I think it's great if you don't want to do that. You know, I think people have their own things, but you know, Elon Musk, which I'm sure, I don't know if he's probably not popular these days, but you know, he has this saying that like that running a company is like chewing glass and looking into the abyss, and he's 100% right. Like basically, when you're the head of a company from the very earliest days, all of the worst news in the business comes to you. And you are also, they say that, you know, heavy is the head that wears the crown, but it's like you are wearing the existential risk of the business sort of like every day. And it is, I mean, I'm telling you, it is grueling. And so I have learned over time to go to sleep. Like when I have terrible days, which I do, I would say 2 out of every 5 days is terrible, and then 2 out of every 5 days is like good, and then 1 out of 5 days is just spectacular. But on the 2 out of days that are terrible, I tell my wife it's a terrible day. I'm gonna go to sleep at 8:30, and then get up and fight again the next day. It's easier with coffee.
You know, when you are leading and managing direct reports, what are maybe like 3 or 4 things that are really...
Oh gosh, that's a good one. So I would say, so one of the things about starting and running a business is that there's 1,000 books to read about how to do it, and I think I've read sort of all of them basically, and a lot of them will say like, hire great people and tell them what to do and let them be. And after having done that 20 times, I've just come to believe that that is completely the wrong thing to do. And so what has worked for me over many years of failing at this is to myself figure out, so one of the things about running a business is that you've got to understand sort of like all parts of a business, which includes finance, HR, legal, logistics, supply chain, retail, operations, technology, et cetera. And I have found that if I, first of all, hire great people, be very close to them, and I think when I say be very close to them, what I mean is like, sit next to them and attack the problem together, but also be in every single detail and do not leave anything to chance. And you'll see, like, running a business, like, people are very challenging to manage. They are very challenging to manage.
Do you have any advice for like fundraising in the early stages? And I guess like did you guys bootstrap or how did you get that initial?
So on some level, we got really lucky on that. And I think because, you know, it was this time of like very low interest rates and very high interest in the impact investing world. And then just a few lucky things fell our way. And so we raised a seed round that was like $2.7 million. I would say, yeah, I have a bunch of advice on sort of fundraising, which is like, make a really, really good deck, have a really, really good financial model. And I'm not saying like that doesn't take that long, but just like work on it and work on it and work on it longer than you think you should, 3 months, something like that. And then put your helmet on and get a list of 200 people and then go call all of them. And the hardest thing about fundraising is that, you know, somebody told me that there's somewhere in the ether is a number of no's that you have to get through to get to yes. And that is not a single digit number. Like it is often a triple. I'm doing it right now again, and we've raised, you know, $150 million, something like that. Like it is so hard. And it is like talking about like the days that you go to bed is like, you're trying to raise money, you're running out of money, somebody you thought was gonna come through calls you and says, no, it's not gonna do it. And it is so brutal because the whole thing about like raising money is that you have this like, you have a vision for something that you think is gonna help the world and you think is gonna work, and 9 out of 10 people think that you're wrong or crazy, or that even if you're right, you can't execute it. And so you have to have like the fortitude to withstand all of that brutal no's, and it is so hard.
Thank you for such an inspiring story. Thank you for your time there, sharing it. I wanted to ask, what are the unique issues in working with low-income communities at the intersection of low income and food and nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably sort of, I would put it, at least for me, like more than you think and less than you think. So I think the more than you think is like, especially doing a sort of mission-driven business and not being from a low-income community myself, is like there is a tremendous amount of suspicion of well-meaning white people coming in to help a community, basically. And so there's like, you know, a lot of sort of like work and relationship building has to go into that for sure. And then on the other side, you know, the people are just people. And it's like, you know, we don't have a different marketing message for Watts than we do for Monterey Park or Bellflower or West Hollywood. Like, there's cultural sensitivities for sure, but it's also just dealing with people, you know.
I was going to ask, how do you, is there any strategies you employ to not end up in that same feeling like you had on Wall Street with the business?
You mean like exhausted or?
Yeah, for you personally to feel like you're in this place where you're chasing the business and growing and growing.
No, I mean, the thing that here's my answer to that is like when we started, the big company was Tom's at the time. And, you know, I mean, I'm just going to be honest, like I never liked that. I never liked Tom's. And the reason is because to me, there wasn't enough sort of like respect for how hard business is. So I mean, what I mean is like, you know, if you think about like what business is, it's like you got like this product, and you've got to figure out how to get people to buy it, or this service you got to, but you also have to figure out the entire back end that supports it in a way, and there's never enough people to do what you need to do. There's always too much cost, and you've got to make profit back to pay your investors, et cetera. It's like, it's impossible and it's impossible for startup companies facing McDonald's and Starbucks. It's just so hard. And so the idea that you can also sort of donate cost of goods sold to somebody else because that makes people feel good about you, to me, both seem like disrespectful to the laws of business, but also there was something about, and now I'm just going off on a tirade on Tom's, not even answering your question, but there was also something about like, they knew who their customer was, right? And their customer was the affluent, wealthy person that was gonna feel good and feel charitable. But Everytable's not like that. Like everything that we've done has driven the mission into the structure of the business. So, and I mean the franchise model. Like if you think the franchise model sounds great and well-meaning, it's also great capital for us, right? Great return on investment, great risk abdication for us on some level. And also like, you know, if you think about the opportunity in Everytable, it's like, I promise you, like there's, you know, you go into Brentwood, like we haven't opened a store in Brentwood because real estate's really expensive, and there's a, you know, Creation and a Press Juicery and a Whole Foods and a Tender Greens and a Sweet Green and a Tokai and blah, 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 blah. And there's nothing like that in Watts in South LA, and there's way, way, way more people. And so what I'm saying is like, the mission is the business for Everytable. And so for me, it's like what's grueling about it is how hard it is, because I think business is really hard. I think food businesses is really hard. And then I think healthy food, fresh food at fast food prices is really, really hard. But the light at the end of the tunnel is like, I do have this belief that if I ever end up making a huge amount of money on Everytable, which I think is very possible, everybody benefits from that. The workers who own equity, the franchisees, the customers who get that. There's no trade-off as far as I'm concerned.
Do they see the mission-driven aspect? Do they see it as a distraction, or do they see it as like a product market fit opportunity?
That's a good question. Yeah, so the question is, do VCs who are trying to return capital, do they see the mission as a good thing or just a distraction? And I think the answer is, I think there's sort of a couple things to say about this. Like, Peter Thiel actually has this, he sort of doesn't like social enterprises, and what he doesn't like is he doesn't like doing a business that is also like esteemed by the world as good, because he thinks that that's a recipe for tons and tons of competition. What he likes about mission-driven businesses is, and this is what I like about it, is when you find a problem that nobody else is really trying to solve, and you say, I think I'm gonna solve that. I'm gonna work on that for a long, and that is a good thing, because that means that you're sort of like alone in a market trying to figure something out. So in general, VCs don't care. They really don't care. But but everybody knows that when you have a mission that galvanizes people, recruiting is better, retention is better, customers are better, you can go through hard times with more fortitude, et cetera. So it's really like, can you find the thing that is different that you're gonna figure out because you care about that? Even if the world, like he uses this example, which I think is probably right, about like, you know, is SpaceX, I'm sounding like pro Elon Musk, I'm sorry for that, but you know, is SpaceX like a social enterprise? Well, maybe not at the time, but it was to him, right? Like that's what he cared about. And he said, I'm gonna figure out this problem. And I think if you can find that, then you can galvanize a lot of, you get all the benefits of a social enterprise, and then you get VCs pretty interested.
I wanted to ask you about conscious capitalism. It's an idea that's fairly new to me. I feel like it's already
successful as a startup, and then on top of that, you also have this goal of doing good for the world. What do you say to the naysayers, and how did you how were you able to like shift your perspective that, okay, I can do good for the world and make money?
I think it was a great question. It's about conscious capitalism, and I don't know how to summarize it, but like, is it bullshit and is it distracting on some level? Like, and I think the answer is kind of yes, to be honest. And what I mean is like, sort of like what I was saying, like, you know, when I have come away from 10 years of this with like a deep respect for business and entrepreneurship and a belief that, that it requires sort of like intense focus. And so all of the sort of like excess window dressing sort of like has to go on some level. And the thing that for us, like going back to the earlier question, is like, if you can build it into if you're like I don't know what a good example of is, if you're a pest control company that also is donating to blah, 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 that I think is like, you know, when push comes to shove, that's always going to be jettisoned. But if your mission is the business, then it can carry you forever. I mean, I think that's sort of like my message, which is like, figure out, like, you know, we've all got this one life. Like, what are you going to spend it on? You know, and I think it's a good thing to find a problem and attack it and see if you can solve it. And of course, you got to pay people well. Of course, you got to be environmentally, but it's like, is the business your mission? Then it'll carry you a long way.
Like where you see the overlap from your nonprofit work and like where maybe like that kind of aided Everytable and maybe where.
Yeah, great question, actually. And it's, you know, Steve Jobs has this Stanford speech. I don't know if you guys have read it, but he talks about all the different things he was interested in, including like took a calligraphy class one day, and he never really figured out why that was meaningful to him until 20 years later. That's why the Macintosh is so beautiful and has such great graphics, et cetera. And so I think the point of that for me is like, you know, the only way that we were able to pull off this social equity franchise model is because A, I had a sort of a good understanding of finance from Wall Street, and then B, I had the ability to raise money from foundations and understand how to speak that language. And then the only way that we were successful opening in Compton and Watts, et cetera, was because we had experience sort of operating there, basically. So it all, you know, like I said, like I think that life is this like very personal journey that we're all on. And at the end of the day, it all sort of worked out together.
I've got a couple of questions, if I might.
Shoot.
Could you describe one of the ways that I've spoken to students about the problem that you're trying to solve, and if this is inaccurate, if you could help them understand I got it wrong, and if I'm pointing correctly, if you could just unravel that for them. Why is a salad more expensive than a hamburger? And you analyze both of the business models of the fast food, industrial food system, and then you created a different system. Could you speak about that and maybe give some examples?
Yeah.
Kind of flesh that out for them?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think it's sort of counterintuitive to sort of like popular understanding basically, but people think, like if you ask people that question, like why is a hamburger more expensive than salad? Usually what they'll say, in my opinion, is like the ingredients of a salad are more expensive, and then why is that? Probably because the government subsidizes a lot of commodity crops, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But I don't find that to be true. And what I mean is like, I think if you went to a grocery store and bought the ingredients for a burger and fries and cooked it yourself, and went to the grocery store and bought the ingredients for a chicken salad, it would basically cost the same thing. The reason that it's different all comes down to the idea of perishability and manufacturing efficiency. And so the thing you have to understand is that people use this word food system, and they say, you know, we have a messed up food system, and that's true. But if you think about what the food system is, it's basically grocery stores, liquor stores, convenience stores, restaurants, and fast food. That's basically it. And the companies that have dominated the last 60 or 70 years, so if you think about like the middle of a grocery store, the cereal, the chips, all the stuff that's for sale in the grocery stores and for sale in the convenience stores, and also fast food, all of them are characterized by basically non-perishability. So think about like, how long does it take Pop-Tarts to go bad? How long does it take Pringles to go bad? You know, and so if you think about the different, and if you think about why that matters, what it means is that you can produce Pringles in a single factory at incredible efficiency with incredible automation, incredible robots, et cetera. And then because it never goes bad, you can send it all over the world. Well, imagine trying to do that with a salad. You just can't do it. You have to make the salad right there because it goes bad very fast. And so the entire food system that we have, the reason we have this crazy obesity crisis is because non-perishable food is much more efficient to produce and distribute, and we didn't understand that it was fatal until it was too late, basically. And so to go back to your question, fast food is basically a non-perishable supply chain. If you think about like what you get from McDonald's, it's going to be like the bun, which never goes bad, fries, which never goes bad, soda, which never goes bad, beef, which is frozen. Maybe you have a little thin layer of iceberg lettuce, which, by the way, is like the least perishable lettuce, and that's it. And so all of these fast food places are basically, they're basically locations where you fry or microwave a non-perishable product that was made in a huge factory with incredible efficiency. And salads are not.
And so then your plan was around the manufacturing efficiency in that one facility so that you could be competitive from a price.
It was about the manufacturing efficiency, yes, but then because we're dealing with a perishable product that is much harder, then we have to take it to our stores ourselves and sell it very, very quickly, and then manage that inventory at the stores with a crazy algorithm that keeps waste incredibly low, despite the unpredictability of consumer behavior.
What kind of protection plan do you have in place if there were to be a food shortage or some kind of supply chain issue? Like beef, for example, you just freeze it and it'll stay for how long you need to, but you can't freeze lettuce.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like it you know, and it's happened. Like our fridges have gone down. It's like it's terrible. I mean, the good news about Everytable is, and this is like not exactly the question you asked, but because we have a centralized facility, when we are much more dynamic than a standard, like if you think about like Wingstop, right? Think about like if chicken wings, if there's a shortage of Wingstop is screwed because they have the equipment that can only make chicken wings. But Everytable, we have all kinds of ovens and blah. So if beef goes out, we can put chicken in, we can put turkey in, et cetera. But you know, if electricity goes out, we're in trouble.
I got two more. Thank you for your patience. Can you describe one of your most popular items?
Yeah. Let's see. I think the one of the top sellers is a pretty new one. It's a chili crisp sesame noodles with sesame chicken. Incredible. We've got a turkey taco bowl that does really well, a chicken shawarma that does really well, a salmon superfood salad that does really well. We've got a whole bunch of collaborations coming out. We're doing, I don't know if anybody knows the South LA hip hop artist named G Perico. We're doing a collaboration with G Perico. We're doing a collaboration with RuPaul. So you'll see some fun new items coming your way. Ooh. That's a good. So he said, "What's your favorite and least favorite part about being your own boss?" I think the favorite part is sort of easy on some level. Like it's two things. Like, you know, when I was leaving Wall Street, everybody would, you know, Wall Street is a very arrogant place, you know, and people would be like, "Well, how is, you know, is it going to be as intellectually challenging?" And but then, you know, like I was saying, like running a business is almost infinitely complicated because you have to learn all these marketing, brand, logistics, operation, how to manage people, how to run team. So it's like I have a very sort of frenetic, curious mind that running a business helps. But the the thing I like most about it goes to this question about like your own personal journey, and like at the end of the day, and I don't mean like, this sounds sort of like self-aggrandizing, and that's not how I mean it, because it is true, like you need every single person, and like one of the things I love most is like being part of a team, like a high-functioning team. But at the end of the day, the person making the decisions for Everytable is me. And so it's both an expression of like my values, but it's also like the strategic competition that I'm sort of playing. And I love that. Like I wanted to be the guy sort of like doing that. What's the worst thing about it? I don't know, man. Like I think those like, it really, there is the number of existential threats that come up, and like the number of sort of like adrenaline spikes on a regular basis that I have to deal with is like very high, and that is very hard.
I promise my last question, and then we're going to move to the students, okay? Are you incorporated as a public benefit corporation, or how did you incorporate your business, and what was the thinking about that structure?
So we incorporated it as what's called a public benefit corp, which basically means it's basically like a for-profit company, but instead of just having a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, we also have a fiduciary duty to the public benefit that we claimed when we incorporated. And I think that, to me, that one of the things that you do see in business is, to the question of like venture capitalists, is like, as you raise more and more money, you get less and less control of the business, and people have different agendas, and venture capitalist agenda is to get their money back at a much higher rate, period, and at the timeline that suits them, not what the business needs. And I don't blame them for that. Like that's great, and we've got a lot of great money from them, and that was helpful. But to be able to have the ability to fight off investors or shareholder lawsuits, et cetera, by defending our decisions by saying it was for the long-term benefit of the public mission is, I think it's sort of good strategic thinking and how to deal with corporate challenges, but it's also true and right. Like we should be making decisions for the long term of the public benefit, not just what is best for XYZ venture capital fund.